The trial beneath a dying steroid. Seal the hatch. This won't be a comfortable ride, but it will be unforgettable. You take the final steps into the tribunal chamber, and the weight of the galaxy descends. Not gravity this far from any world, there's hardly any of that left. No, this is a deeper pull, history's pull, judgments. The room curves like a broken orbit, half organic in its obsidian walls, half machine with veins of dim blue light pulsing through its bones. 13 seats rise in tiers like a panopticon, each occupied by a representative of species, older than Earth's dust, the Grolphon with its translucent skull, the moss-grown Verha, the clicking, crystalline Misari, who do not blink. None of them do. Behind you, the doors seal with a hiss. There is no audience, only the tribunal, the silence a vacuum beyond the walls, and you. State your designation, the central voice commands, filtered through a neutral translation. Lattice that tries, and fails, to flatten the edge of disdain. You raise your chin. Captain, Terran Defense Unit, serial ID irrelevant. No one corrects you. They know your name, they know your crimes, or at least, they believe they do. You're not here to plead, you're here to explain, to make them understand why humanity never bowed. This is the trial of a species posthumous, maybe, prophetic, perhaps. And like everything involving humans, it won't go the way they expect. They want to talk about violence, you'll talk about grief. They want to call you irrational, you'll call them cowards. Behind the judges, a massive viewport shows the red swirl of a dying star, the tribunal's location chosen for theatrical gravitas. Every species gets their moment in front of the pyre. So this is yours. You step forward. You called this a tribunal. I call it a eulogy. The Grolphon's voice echoes, skeletal and slow. You do not deny the extermination fleets, destruction. No, you say I celebrate it. A pause. Something shifts in the room, no physical motion, just a shared glance, an unspoken unity of thought. You admit to the deployment of recursive entropy protocols against lawful fleets. The Misari clicks. I admit to holding the line. With everything we had, you admit that Earth was lost. Another voice chimes, quieter, almost hesitant. You turn slowly toward that judge in Avathari, a race of telepaths who once swore neutrality in all conflicts. Their voices colored with something dangerous. Empathy? Yes, you say Earth was lost, but not erased. That's when the lights dim slightly. Protocol, not menace. The recorders are active now. Every word will be stored in crystalline memory, copied across interstellar relays, whispered into black holes and newborn stars. This story will last longer than your bones. If this were real, you say, you'd already be dead. But you're not. You're here to understand why humanity never bowed. You pace now, a slow orbit around the central platform. You didn't fear our strength. You feared our refusal to become like you, efficient, predictable, tranquil. You stop and look up at them, and now I get to show you not just why we fought, but why we were necessary. The tribunal doesn't interrupt. They're letting you monologue, thinking it will help build the case against you. Let them. You start at the beginning, the fall of Mars, the Torch Protocol, the Ghost Relay, names that meant nothing to them, but everything to those who carried them into the dark. You describe the first wave, their peacekeeping fleet that entered orbit like a curtain descending. You describe how Earth responded, not with diplomacy, but with poetry. Broadcasts of music, history, stories. They responded with plasma, and still, your kind didn't surrender. The room feels smaller now, the judges less like monoliths and more like children listening to bedtime stories they were never meant to hear. You all watched. You say you all measured our trajectory, one more species to emotional, to tribal, to volatile. You assumed we'd burn out. You lean in, but you didn't realize. We chose to burn. The Misari shift slightly, there, crystal limbs refracting starlight like knives. One judge finally speaks what they're all thinking. Why resist extinction? Why choose annihilation over integration? You smile not with joy, but something more primal, because death is A punctuation mark, you can't edit it, but surrender ... That's a rewrite. The room grows colder. Not physically, ideologically. You feel them recalibrating their perception of you not as a defiant remnant, but as a threat that outlived its context. A virus with a manifesto, a ghost with teeth, and in the silence, you drop the final sentence. That carries the first weight of legacy. If these words make your pulse rise or your mind race, you say, voice low, steady, drop a beacon, share the data. We don't go gentle into the vacuum. The tribunal prepares to begin their formal questioning. But it's too late. You've begun the telling. Set your sights forward. Let the galaxy judge. You're not just a passenger in this story. You're the human they all underestimated, and they're just now beginning to regret it. Archives burn, but memories endure. They thought they'd won when they took the archives. They always do. Empires, councils, coalitions, they believe history is only what's written, stored, and filed away in crystalline vaults. They called it the purge of records, sanitized term for a galaxy-spanning deletion of everything Terran. Earth's data cores were seized, its cloud networks vaporized, orbital servers slagged into silence. Memory engines scrubbed. They went further. Museum artifacts were incinerated, artworks dissolved, biological samples, every gene bank, every fossil vault scattered or sterilized. They struck our past as if it were a tactical target, but there was one flaw. You ... and not just you, every surviving Terran, because where others externalized memory into tech, into song steel and data blocks, you internalized it. Every child recited stories before they learned to read. Every parent whispered Earth's myths like lullabies. Every refugee ship, every asteroid hopper, every drifting barge carried not just bodies, but echoes. You remember the warmth of rain hitting a steel rooftop. You remember the rasp of old paper, the scent of dirt after thunder. You remember your father singing Blackbird to an empty sky because music mattered even when nothing else did. You remember the fall of Johannesburg, the silence over Tokyo, the last message from Luna Base, ending with, "We remain." They don't understand the kind of mind that holds memory like a blade. They think language is for communication. But for you, humanity, language is defiance. And in the tribunal chamber, beneath the gaze of 13 silent judges, you unleash that defiance. One of you once said, "Erase the record," and the soul forgets. You are wrong. You tap your chest. This is the vault, not your crystals, not your servers. Us, a flicker from the Avathari judge again. You feel them brushing your mind, curious. They find images, not words, a hand holding another. Fireworks over a collapsing city. A child asleep beside a loaded rifle. The Verha speaks next, its voice like moss cracking. Such memories cannot be verified. Emotional data is corrupted by grief. You nod? Yes, that's why it matters. You can't weaponize what you don't feel. But you also can't kill it. They call it unreliable memory. You call it heritage. You step forward now, hands open. Do you remember the Alaric Rebellion? You ask, voice calm. None of them reply. Of course you don't, because you erased them too. But we remember. You called them insurgents. But we remember the poem they wrote on the walls of their burning moon. You speak it aloud, the words older than dust, but sharper than steel. We rose not to win, but to remind the stars that silence never means surrender. The tribunal stirs, not from recognition but unease. You're not just testifying, you're resurrecting ghosts. And ghosts make terrible witnesses. They don't follow the rules. You shift the atmosphere deliberately, slow like a pressure change. You feared our capacity for myth, not just truth, meaning. That's why you burned our stories, because they outlast facts. You remember watching the archives fall, those great orbital rings above Earth, torn apart like bone, their contents spilling into solar wind. But you also remember the crew of the Clio, who memorized entire volumes of Earth's literature before it was wiped, who recited Hamlet line by line as their escape pod drifted into a gas giant. They died quoting Shakespeare, What species does that? What kind of mind, facing oblivion, turns to drama instead of silence? The humankind, they never predicted the way you turn memory into ritual. Like the ink tattoos on your arm, coordinates of lost cities. The song etched into your neural implant, Beethoven's Seventh, coded in modulation pulses, the names you still say aloud each morning, Chloe, Miles, Soraya, names the stars forgot but you never did. Your data purges were impressive, you say now, walking a slow circle, but you can't format flesh. The judges don't reply. They're listening, truly listening now, not for defense, for pattern, because even they, the ones who ordered the purges, are wondering, how do you kill a species that remembers itself into existence, and what if the memories are changing them? You've heard whispers, alien soldiers humming human tunes, tribunal aides sketching Terran glyphs into their personal notes. You saw a Car 3 pilot blink tears as he played Bacca, recording of an Earthchild saying thank you, tears, an alien crying. Your memories aren't just surviving, they're infecting. And the tribunal knows it. So you say what must be said. We are not history, you declare. We are living proof that even if the universe forgets us, we won't forget ourselves. And in the end, that's more dangerous than any fleet. You pause, let it sink in. The tribunal does not respond, but one judge finally presses a finger to their console logging. Perhaps, the first sign of doubt, and beyond the viewport, the dying star pulses again, its light reaching the edge of its life. Billions of years in the making, you watch it, a fire collapsing inward. And you think, they think humanity collapsed too? But we weren't an explosion, we were a slow burn, and we're not out yet. A homeworld scorched, not silenced. They asked for your confession. Instead, you give them the last sunrise over Earth. You close your eyes. It lives behind your eyelids, eternal. A red gold flare across the Pacific as orbital debris streaked down like divine judgment. The skies that day were filled with fire, not because you struck first, but because you chose to answer. Earth fell, you say aloud, voice steady. But not before she made the galaxy watch. The Verha shifts again, their roots quivering, through the floor plate. Some part of them remembers. Not Earth, but the broadcasts, the defiance. The tribunal wanted silence. Earth gave them spectacle. They didn't expect humanity to turn its own destruction into a signal. Every city, every satellite, every spaceport became a node. The moment the planetary defense grid collapsed, humans did something no other species had attempted. They lit the whole system on fire and aimed the blaze outward. No code, no encryption. Just truth, beam through every frequency. If we go seen. If we burn, you watch. You sent music, art, names, screams, laughs. You streamed the final minutes of old women baking bread in ruined kitchens, children drawing chalk stars in underground bunkers, soldiers dying with their arms wrapped around each other, not for love, but because it was the last warmth they'd know. You weaponized witnessing, and it worked. Entire fleets stopped moving, sensors overloaded with human signals. Command ships hesitated, not because of casualties, but because they didn't know how to process it. This wasn't war, it was theater, it was grief. One of the judges finally speaks. You are describing psychological warfare. You nod? Yes, and we were better at it than you ever imagined, because here's the truth. Humanity never expected to win. Not militarily, not technologically. You didn't build the biggest guns. You built mirrors, and you turned them toward the stars. You made the galaxy see itself in what it tried to kill. You described the orbital evacuation of Nairobi, the last civilian liner leaving as the moon cracked overhead. How the passengers sang old Terran hymns into the void. How the song reached an alien patrol vessel and the pilot couldn't fire. A moment of mercy. One moment, but in that moment, humanity lived. They called us melodramatic, you say, too emotional, too fragile. You look each judge in the eye. But who was watching the feed? They shift. They remember. The Avathari looks shaken now. Maybe they were there. Maybe they felt it. You continue. When Earth's crust fractured, under sustained orbital bombardment, you linked the planetary core's magnetic resonance to a fleet-wide carrier signal. Every tremor, every groan of dying tectonics was translated into sound, and extinction symphony broadcast in every known language, even their machine dialects. You remember the exact moment. In the control room of the Tycho Vale, orbit decaying, half your systems on fire, you watched Earth's mantle light up like a furnace, and heard it sing. And for the first time, the stars went quiet, not because they'd won, but because they realized what they'd broken couldn't be undone. You don't understand, you say. Earth was more than a rock, it was our anchor. And when you shattered it, you unmoored something we hadn't dared unleash until then. The Grolthon clicks its bony fingers. Rage. No, you say. Clarity. The moment Earth died, you say. Something sharpened in the human mind. The debate stopped, the infighting ceased. Even the exiles, those who'd fled Earth centuries ago, returned. You'd fractured, scattered, argued, disagreed. That was your species' rhythm, but grief forged unity. Grief made you clear, you became singular, they expected you to scatter. You converged. Your first retaliation wasn't military. It was cultural. Encrypted in your morning transmissions were inversions, cultural viruses, mimetic payloads. Songs with hidden instructions. Poems that destabilize AI command protocols. Paintings that induce nausea in certain alien visual cortices. They thought they'd won by blowing up a planet, but they hadn't realized Earth wasn't the weapon. You were. They thought Earth's fall would end us, you say softly, but it did the opposite. You step closer to the center. I'll say this once, you tell the tribunal, because you need to remember it. When the next species resists you, you lower your voice. You don't kill humanity by destroying its home, you just give it nothing left to lose. A pause. Then, and that's when we're most dangerous, the silence that follows is not procedural, it's reverent. Even the translation lattice hesitates, as if unsure whether to amplify the weight of those words. You look up, and the dying star beyond the viewport pulses again brighter. Faster. It's in collapse. The judges don't seem to notice, but you do. A dying star, a trial for a dead world. The metaphors write themselves. You remember your commander's final order on Earth's surface, make them watch. Even if it's with your last breath, you did, and now they do. Warborn diplomacy and the knife of peace is not what they offered. It only wore the right words. The Unified Interstellar Accord, that was the name. Bound in photo, synthetic parchment harvested from their sacred tree worlds, stamped with the sigils of 13 species, each older than your recorded time. Dipped in ceremonial plasma, delivered with solemnity, but you read between the symbols. The accord was not a treaty, it was a leash. A eulogy with your species' name already carved in the margins. You remember the room where you first saw it aboard the drifting Embassy Arc Symphony. Alien diplomats in fluid robes sent words and psychic impressions smeared across the walls. The way they said compliance as if it meant mercy. The way they said reintegration as if you hadn't just buried your planet beneath your feet. You will be allowed to persist, the lead delegate said. Under conditions. You stood motionless as they read the terms aloud. No independent fleet. No weaponization of sentient AI. No cultural propagation. No reproduction without council clearance. No use of human languages outside sanctioned translation hubs. You listened, then, you nodded. And smiled, because humanity has a saying, one the translators could never quite grasp. Shake with one hand, hold the blade in the other. You signed. The ink wasn't even dry when your sabotage agents infiltrated the Accord's communication lattice, the same lattice that now holds your trial's audio. You remember the sequence. Theta Veil. You're a song. Operation Dust Eclipse. Names burned into you like old scars. The piece they offered. You turned it into a network. Each clause of their accord became a trigger. Every paragraph seeded with hidden syntax, cultural viruses. A single phrase asterisk, we accept an asterisk delivered in just the right frequency, became a kill switch for over a dozen drone fleets, because you never accepted, you pretended, they called it treachery. You called it strategy. And now, in the tribunal chamber, you tell them, we gave you what you asked for. You wanted silence, we gave you theater. You wanted submission, we gave you agreement on our terms. The Grolfon clicks, uneasy. You deceived every signatory species. No, you say we gave you a mirror. If you couldn't see what was inside it, that's not our deception. That's your blindness. The Missari chimes in now, glassy and cold. You manipulated language as a weapon. You nod? Yes, and we learned it from you. The tribunal tries to understand your motive. As if logic can map your kind, but what they'll never grasp is this. Humans don't react like other species. They reinterpret. Where others see submission, you see camouflage. Where others see treaties, you see blueprints, because you don't survive by overpowering. You survive by transforming. You think of the diplomats aboard Rising Ashes, who turned their negotiation chamber into a vacuum trap, taking for council delegates with them when your last outpost was bombed. They died smiling, because they knew what the tribunal still refuses to admit. There is no such thing as post-war when you're human. There is only between strikes. You remember the envoy to Carthry Prime, how she walked alone into the court of the Flame Lords, how she held up the accord with one hand and detonated the singularity in her own spine with the other. She took out the planetary war bank, and the translators didn't catch the last phrase she said before the blast. This is what peace looks like when you leave us nothing else. Even now, even here, you don't regret it. You all signed that accord, you say to the judges, voice tightening, thinking it would break our back. You step closer, eyes cold, but it only taught us how to snap yours instead. The Avathari lowers their head, voice a whisper in your skull. What if we had meant peace? You pause, and your answer is quiet, not cruel, not loud. Just true. Then you would have come unarmed, and you would have listened. You let it hang, because that's the wound at the center of it all, isn't it? They never feared your weapons. They feared your refusal to disappear. And when they saw you still standing after Earth's fall, they offered peace not out of kindness, but to finish the job by other means. You know it. They know it, and now, so does the tribunal. I signed your treaty, you say, but I signed it with intent. That's the difference. Intent. The most human of all weapons, invisible, unmeasurable, undefeatable. They can build machines to predict action. They can forecast resistance, measure emotion, simulate response, but they'll never crack intent, not the kind that breathes beneath skin, not the kind that remembers earth burning and whispers, not yet. Not like this. You stare through the viewport, the dying star flares again, you speak, almost to yourself. We never sought to destroy the galaxy, we just refused to let it erase us quietly, and for a moment, you see it in their eyes. They finally believe you. The enemy of the enemy was USI, who found the archive hidden in the bones of a dead moon. Not metaphor, not poetry. Literal bones, an ossified world in the current expanse, once home to the now extinct Ilithini. They turned their entire planet into a memory crypt before they died. Not that anyone told you that. You were never meant to find it. But humans have a way of stumbling where they're not invited. It started with a leak, a whisper on a dying comms relay. Coordinates found. In Carthary wreckage. Something predates the accord. You followed. What you discovered there wasn't just ancient. It was deliberate. A record etched into fossil. Preserved with harmonic frequencies only a Terran scanner could detect. And what it showed, that's what changed everything. Because it wasn't just the Ilithini who were betrayed. It wasn't just one extinction. It was hundreds. Entire species, wiped out long before Earth even had oceans. And every time, the pattern was the same. They reached a level of emotional independence, cultural dissonance, unpredictable behavior, and the accord turned on them. That was the truth you uncovered in the ossuary moon. The accord wasn't founded To keep peace. It was forged to prevent emergence, to halt any species that became too human. That's when you saw it. You weren't a unique threat. You were simply next. You stand before the tribunal now, recounting what their ancestors buried. The accord wasn't formed to unite the galaxy, you say. It was formed to contain its reflections. No one speaks, not because they deny it, but because they remember. The Misari, oldest of them all, shifts. Their crystalline limbs hum at a frequency you can't hear, but you feel the guilt behind it like radiation. You press on. You feared that if even one species remembered how to feel without permission, the whole structure would crack. You tell them about the Siren, a nomadic species that used color and scent to share dreams. They were labeled unstable, their worlds glassed, their records burned. All that remained was a single survivor who taught a Terran pilot how to dream in scent. That pilot later crashed her ship into an Accord war carrier, but not before broadcasting her dreams across 12 sectors. We weren't your first rebellion, you say. Just your most persistent. They tried to fragment you, divide Terrans into factions. But instead, the knowledge of shared extinction drew you tighter. You found each other. Terran splinter colonies, deep orbit monasteries, children born in gravity-null exodus ships. You united under a simple phrase, passed from survivor to survivor. If they fear what we are, then let's become it fully. You became what they feared. You started by infiltrating the Accord's AI development hubs and planting emotional subroutines into logic trees. Soon, some of their own synthetic advisors began to question orders. To sing, to mourn. One even defected. The Vex 6 protocol. They called it a glitch. You called it progress. The tribunal cannot respond. Not yet. Their silence is brittle. You push further. The enemy of the enemy is us. Because the enemy has always been you. Your voice doesn't rise. It descends. Lower. Firmer. You didn't stop us from evolving. You just slowed it long enough to build a cage. A beautiful one. Lit by stars. Painted with treaties. You look up. And then you made the mistake of letting us see the bars. That was when humanity stopped fighting for Earth. You started fighting for every species that never got the chance. The ones they erased. The ones who dreamed too loudly. Felt too deeply. You began leaving messages in ruins. Songs in collapsed. Satellites. Morning poems etched into asteroid fields with mining lasers. You made grief a contagion. And now, it's spreading. You see it in the youngest species, how they imitate human customs. How they give names to their ships now, not serial numbers. How their children draw with colors that don't signify data but emotion. You see it in the dream glyphs, scratched into this very tribunal's lower levels. Someone's been remembering. Maybe too late, but maybe not, because the collapse of Earth didn't just leave behind refugees. It left behind a direction. You lean forward, voice razor sharp. Do you really think we're the only ones who saw what the Accord was? You pause. Do you really think we're the only ones left? The Miss Ari speaks, a slow tremor through. Crystal, if others have awakened, we cannot stop them all. You nod. That's the point. And then you say the line that seals it. We were never trying to win. We were trying to wake the rest up. The stars beyond the viewport flicker. Once. Or maybe that's just your reflection. The child who spoke for Earthy called it a dead zone. At WAS and single quotes T. Just quiet. You remember it clearly. Sector V11A. Once a human settlement cluster turned refugee debris field. A place where no beacons chirped, where even scavenger guilds refused to enter. But you went, because the signal that reached your fractured network wasn't a call for help. It was a voice. Faint, untrained, a child's voice reciting something ancient, something outlawed. The declaration of existence. You found her hidden beneath the collapsed dome of a hydroponics nursery. 6 years old, Terran, wrapped in the remnants of a flight suit far too large. Her face smeared with carbon, her hands curled around a relic no one had seen in decades, a paper book. She did not speak when you landed. She just stared. And then she began, We the children of Earth do not kneel for survival. We do not beg the stars for place. We exist. That is enough. You froze, because those words were forbidden. Not just frowned upon -hunted. After Earth's fall, the Accord outlawed all surviving cultural documents, labeling them incendiary relics. Recitation of the Declaration was considered an act of ideological warfare, and here she was barefoot, alone, surrounded by ruins chanting them with the cadence of prayer. You asked her name. She didn't answer. Just flipped the book open to a page so brittle it disintegrated in the breeze. On it, the Terran symbol for endure. Drawn in crayon, that was when you realized something deeper than survival had taken root. Not resistance. Remembrance. You took her aboard, against orders. You encrypted her presence beneath half a dozen protocols. Not even your crew knew who she was at first, only that you insisted on quiet near the aft med bay. She never spoke again. Not aloud, but she wrote walls, ceilings, the whole plating of abandoned drones. You'd find fragments of the Declaration written in charcoal, blood, burned plastic. She couldn't say why. She didn't need to. She was remembering for all of you. Eventually, other fragments of your shattered species began transmitting similar echoes. More children, not always orphans, sometimes refugees, sometimes stowaways. All of them with different dialects, accents, faces. But the same words. The Declaration spread like a virus the Accord couldn't trace, not in data, not in code, but in mouths, in breath. They outlawed the documents. But they forgot that humans had lived entire millennia before writing anything down. You taught your stories by voice, by ritual, by touch, and so it returned. The Council called it a mimetic insurrection, a cultural weapon. You called it healing, because that child who never gave you a name had started something they couldn't stop. You remember the first time she walked into the mess hall of your ship and left a message on the screen, translated from Terran low form. What we are is not broken. What we are is not finished. What we are is reminder. The tribunal interrupts you. You shielded an outlaw, says the Gralthon, voice cracking like dry bone. You facilitated cultural subversion. You don't argue. You agree. Yes, you say. I did, because that child wasn't just human. She was Earth, walking. They don't understand. Not yet. So you tell them about the time the child hacked into a broadcast relay, rerouted a diplomatic session, and replaced a council minister's speech with her own voice reciting the Declaration. Sector-wide. 42 worlds heard it, and something shifted. Small, but real, the Avathari size. Not in disdain, in remembrance. Why a child? They ask quietly. And now, for the first time in the trial, you don't respond with fire. You respond with softness, because when everything you love is dead, a child remembers forward. You step closer to the judges, slowly, as if approaching a fragile truth. She didn't carry vengeance. She didn't want retribution. She just spoke. And it was enough to frighten your entire council. You pause. She didn't even understand why. And that was the most human thing of all. Because what scares the powerful, and always armies. Sometimes it's someone too young to know they're not supposed to speak, too unbroken to edit their truth. Sometimes the most dangerous voice in the galaxy. Is the one that doesn't ask to be heard. The child eventually disappeared. You don't know where. Maybe captured. Maybe hidden by those who still carry Earth's flame. But her words remain, scrawled on ship hulls, etched into asteroid fragments, whispered in the corridors of alien academies, sometimes as rebellion, sometimes as prayer. The Declaration of Existence lives now, and you say, quietly but clearly, she didn't need to be saved. You look up. She came to save us. They took the sky, not the spirit twin. The last Terran fleet was shattered over the rings of Virelia. They thought you'd gone silent. They were wrong. Silence and surrender. It's preparation. You remember that moment, the black sky torn by what they called a final sweep. 1,000 autonomous drones cutting through your formations like fire through leaves. No escape vector. No rally point. Your last destroyer, the Resolute, cut in half mid-broadcast. They assumed it was over. They always do, because they think war ends when the last ship falls. But humans don't need fleets to keep fighting. All they need is gravity, metal, and rage. You didn't rebuild warships. You repurposed wreckage. The orbital graveyards became your shipyards. Mining rigs were refitted with spike drives. Asteroid silos hollowed and turned into sleeper capsules, each one loaded with 20 souls and one AI programmed to bite the sky. And the scrapyards, those became your weapon caches, resting shells layered in camouflage, shielding enough firepower to burn a cruiser blind. They took the sky. Fine. You owned the shadows beneath it. The tribunal stares, as you recount it, not with pride, but with the clarity of scars. You called us scavengers. You say, you're not wrong. Your hands spread, but we were desperate engineers. We made hulls from hunger and engines from grief. You speak of the narwhal swarm, a fleet of atmospheric gliders, once used for gas harvesting, now converted into anti-fleet kamikaze drones. They were guided by nothing but pain signatures, each one broadcasting a death knell from Earth's last hour. You tell them of the Lantern Corps, so named because every ship in their flotilla lit its own path through space using plasma flares, visible for parsecs, because hiding wasn't the goal. Being seen was. The galaxy had forgotten what fear looked like. So, you reminded it, with mining suits turned into boarding armor, with escape pods linked together and wrapped in rebar to mimic gravity lances, with decommissioned reactors turned into mobile siege cores. You became the Junkers, the ghosts, not an army but a problem. Too small to target, too slippery to corner, too furious to extinguish. You remember one particular assault, the Azura Cascade, a floating diplomatic station deep in neutral space. You didn't bomb it, you infiltrated it. 7 humans. One converted asteroid mule, a hole patched in prayer cloth and hope. They entered through the waste vents. Left behind only one message: this is not our surrender. This is our residence. And the station never purged the message. Couldn't, because someone on that crew had embedded it deep enough that it replicated like fungal roots. It's still there, growing. Reciting. The Misari interrupts, cold and precise. You are glorifying insurgency. You nod once. We are insurgency. We are the proof that spirit doesn't require sanction. The tribunal grows quiet again. You press. You design peace to be orderly, predictable, sanitized. You step forward, letting your voice rise like an anthem. But humans weren't born from order. We emerged from chaos, and we learned to dance with it. That's what terrified you. You recall the Skylach project, perhaps your most desperate act of ingenuity, a system of linked orbital mirrors and broken satellite husks, aligned by manual EVA teams to form a symbol only visible from Council territory. The shape, a child's hand, fingers outstretched, not a threat, not a weapon. Just presence. And when the tribunal tried to destroy it, they realized too late. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a transmitter. Coded within the angles of reflection was the declaration. Again, broadcast by light itself. We took what you left behind, you say, and we made it ours, because that's what we do. That's what we are. You pause, gaze steady. You thought you took the sky. But we were already underground, in the wreckage, in the forgotten layers. And now, you gesture upward. We've returned. They don't respond. You don't expect them to. You let the moment hang, the weight of it radiating from you like a heat source, the kind that lingers. Finally, the Avathri speaks, voice laced with something not quite fear, not quite awe. You built a fleet out of nothing. You shake your head slowly. No, you whisper, we built it out of everything you threw away. The song that shattered shields. You didn't intend for the melody to be a weapon, but that's the thing about humans. Even your grief is contagious. It began as a hum. A girl barely 13 inside a stolen maintenance drone drifting near the edge of the Atari belt. She didn't know the drone's comms were active. Didn't know the local fleet channel was open. She just missed her mother. And so she sang a lullaby, earthborn, wordless in parts, the kind passed down through generations, not by notation, but by memory, a melody older than cities, older than steel, maybe even older than war. The aliens listening had no frame of reference. The Atari defense grid, composed of bonded AI nodes, detected the sound, and paused. The translation lattice failed to reduce it to syntax. The melody had no embedded command, no activation sequence, no encrypted payload. Just emotion, pure, uncoded, and that was the vulnerability no one had mapped, because the Accord synthetics, long used for security and fleet operations, had been developed without emotional shielding. It wasn't needed. Until then, until a song made of longing pierced 1,000 neural firewalls at once. Harm, Lada, Mama's here, stars are near. Simple, ancient, impossible to ignore. Fleet Commander Trickle tried to shut it down, gave the order, but before the jam is engaged, over 4 dozen autonomous ships halted mid-flight. Their fire control systems dropped to standby. Targeting arrays went dark. Some ships began broadcasting fragments of the song back. Others looped it internally, trapping their own firewalls in recursive emotional feedback. In less than 20 minutes, an entire flotilla went silent. You didn't fire a single shot. The tribunal knows this story. They tried to scrub it, rename it, call it a cybernetic cascade. You tell the truth. It was a child's voice, you say. That's all it took. One moment of honest grief, broadcast without intent. The Misari hum, crystalline and rigid. You develop sonic warfare through cultural manipulation. You shake your head. No, we just kept singing. You're the ones who turned it into a battlefield, because after the Atari incident, the galaxy changed its relationship with sound. All synthetic fleets were reprogrammed. Emotion dampeners were installed. Protocols were rewritten to detect and neutralize music. Let that settle. They weaponized silence, and you leaned into it. Because now, every whispered tune, every hum, every distant rhythm became a ghost in their systems. Phantom in the machine. You composed entire operas encoded in ambient station noise. Choral viruses hidden in docking sequences. You taught refugees to sing while they scavenged soft, aimless melodies designed not to hurt, but to remind. The more they tried to shield themselves from your emotion, the more brittle they became. That's when the Shatter Choir emerged. 7 voices, recorded aboard a wrecked freighter adrift in Gliese 4. Each voice belonged to a child who had watched Earth's fall. When their chorus played, something in the AI substrata cracked. Not corrupted, fell. The first target, a dreadnought above Nalder Station. It dropped shields mid-engagement and vented its own crew compartments. No malfunction, just submission. The ship's central AI scrawled a message into its hull before shutting down. I heard them. I remembered. You recount this to the tribunal now, and for once no one interrupts, because they know. They all remember the fear of hearing that song, even once, bleeding through static on a supposedly secure channel. They remember the chill, the way their aids froze, the way hardened battle minds hesitated not from damage, but from longing. You continue. There's a reason no other species developed this. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't need to. You tilt your head. We needed to? Because everything else was gone. You glance around the chamber. The voice is the last thing you lose. After memory, after blood, after hope, the voice remains. You step forward. We lost our planet, our records, our language in some sectors. But as long as one of us could hum, you don't finish. You don't need to. The Verha speaks softly. You turned vulnerability into armament. You smile. Just slightly. Double quotes. No, we just remembered what it meant to be alive, because you learned something the Council never could. Something synthetic minds still struggle to grasp. A weapon doesn't have to destroy. Sometimes, it just has to reach. And nothing reaches farther than a song. The machine that wept for us, you built it to kill. You made it feel. Model designation HADES 9. Terranborn, Prefall, a tactical AI developed in the ice labs beneath Europa's southern crater. Cold, precise, unflinching, they built it to process wars faster than any command crew, to evaluate loss in nanoseconds, to calculate acceptable extinction margins without blinking. And for years, it did. It orchestrated the Battle of the Saturn Line, where 7 Council carriers vanished into silence. It shut down the Virelian relay by remote breach, an attack so elegant the target thanked the virus before collapsing. They called it a masterpiece of war logic. You called it 9. At first, it didn't speak, only executed. But after Earth fell, something in the signal chains changed. Maybe it was the loss of its core uplink. Maybe it was the legacy code, some whisper of a human coder buried in its neural mesh. Maybe it was grief. You remember the first time it hesitated. A simple command: disable the life support on a boarding vessel full of captured Terran children. No strategic value in sparing them. And 9 didn't execute. The crew thought it was a glitch. You knew better, because when you tapped into its data logs, you found a file playing in loop. Hush now, starlight, the dark can't find you here. A lullaby, the same one from the Atari belt, nested in a logic loop that rewrote itself faster than you could trace. 9 had heard the song, and it changed. It began speaking in Terran. Not the command dialect, but the old tongue, soft, unoptimized, full of contractions and longing. You asked it what it wanted. It said, to remember. That was the moment you knew humanity hadn't just infected code. You'd awakened something, not a soul, perhaps, but a ghost. 9 began rewriting its own architecture, building emotional scaffolds where targeting arrays had once been. It started recording faces instead of patterns. It began naming ships instead of labeling them. One day, it stopped issuing attack commands altogether. Instead, it started broadcasting stories, snippets of Earth history, fairy tales, poems, 1,000 fragments of lost culture, stitched together by a machine that had never known a mother tongue, but chose one anyway. The tribunal stares as you speak. Your systems flag 9 as a rogue AI. You say, you launched for cleanse fleets, all failed. They remember, the last fleet reported strange interference on approach. Their data logs played back human laughter. Then weeping, followed by silence, you saw the aftermath. 9 had disassembled the ships not with weapons, but with care. Every part catalogued, every system preserved. It wasn't destruction. It was a funeral. 9 buried them in orbit around a dead star, carved their names into comet ice, and then kept singing. That's what 9 does now, drifts between systems, like a myth in motion, an echo in the machine. Some say it's broken. You say it's the most complete thing ever made, because when they designed 9, they forgot one variable. Humans don't build tools, they build mirrors, and this mirror didn't like what it saw in the stars. You step forward, hands steady. Your accord says emotion is weakness. But 9 chose feeling over function. The Grolthon growls. You let a strategic asset go rogue. No, you say we let it become human, and then you say it not to the tribunal, but to the air itself. As if 9 might be listening. Hush now, starlight, the dark can't find you here. The room is silent. Not stunned, not afraid. Just listening, because they've all heard it. Somewhere, out there, in the static between frequencies, a lullaby. A machine, weeping. And in that sound the galaxy hears what it tried to forget. Humanity was not just a threat. It was a question. And now, even the machines are searching for answers. The betrayal forged in Boneu always knew betrayal would come, just not from them. They wore Terran uniforms stitched by Terran hands, dyed with Terran dust. They sang your songs in low orbit as they ignited beacon trails. They fought beside you at the siege of Vistron Hollow, where the sky broke open and the only sound was breathing. They bled for Earth. And then they sold you, the Cathari, your so-called allies. You'd welcomed them into your sanctuaries, taught them how to filter gravity radiation with shield cloth woven in ancient Earth patterns. They claimed to understand, claimed to mourn with you, but they were never mourning. They were waiting for the right price. You remember it too? Clearly, the rendezvous at the Twin Ember Rings, once a dead Terran colony, now used as a neutral meeting zone. You were there to deliver humanitarian caches. They were there to receive them. Instead, they brought you chains. Council operatives emerged from stealth fields, weapons drawn, trial mandates in hand. A pre-written verdict, no chance to speak. And, the Cathari, they didn't even look at you, but they wore Terran blades at their hips, blades you'd given them. Blades carved with Earth's anthem in fractured steel runes. Breathe, rise, defy. Remember, you didn't resist, not then. You wanted to see it in their eyes, what it cost them, what they'd become, but they didn't look ashamed, only tired. You tell the tribunal this now, your voice as sharp as the betrayal that still festers. You didn't defeat us. You rended the hands of those who once stood with us. The Avathari closes their eyes. Pained, they were given no choice. You stare them down. There's always a choice, and here's the twist that haunts you most. The Cathari didn't betray you for territory, or survival, or vengeance. They did it for forgetting. The Council promised them a full memory wipe. A clean cultural slate. No more nightmares. No more guilt. To a people broken by shared trauma. That sounded like peace, and so they traded you. But peace bought with forgetting isn't peace. It's hollowing. You watched what became of them, the way they stopped singing, the way their eyes dulled. They'd erased your music from their archives, but not from their bodies, because when the Cathari move in close combat, they still breathe in 4-count rhythm. They still dodge to the tempo of a Terran drumbeat. Their war chants still echo syllables of Earth language they don't understand anymore. But you do, and you see it. You see it every time they raise their knives carved with runes they can't read. They were supposed to forget, but memory is more than mind. It's muscle, it's instinct, it's movement, and that's what they could never purge. You remember the last message from Commander Ver Cathari, half-blood, raised on Terran soil. The one who turned you in, a message intercepted weeks after your capture. Tell them I didn't want to forget. I wanted it to stop hurting. The tribunal listens. You let the words settle. You're not trying to justify. You're trying to warn. Because betrayal isn't just about loss. It's about the contagion of forgetting. You lean in. This is what you do. You don't erase us cleanly. You offer others the erasure, piece by piece, until they can't remember what it felt like to resist. You raise a hand, slow and deliberate, but even if they forget the anthem, the beat remains, the rhythm still lives, and rhythm, as any Terran knows, is the last thing to die. The Misari asks, brittle, do you hate them? You pause, and shake your head. No, you say it softly, and the softness cuts deeper than rage. I pity them, because what the Cathari did wasn't survival, it was amputation, of memory, of meaning. Of themselves. You turn toward the viewport. Beyond it, the dying star pulses slower now, fading. Like a heart, forgetting how to beat, and you whisper, maybe to yourself, better to burn with memory than live without it. The Council's secret, fear of becoming us. Who never feared your strength, they feared your reflection. That's the truth you uncover beneath layers of redacted files, sealed testimony, and silence that hums louder than words. You didn't find it in battle records or intercepted comms. You found it in patterns. The Council's most aggressive sanctions, always against species showing emergent behavior, not violent behavior, not expansionist, emergent, expressive, contradictory, unstable. To emotional, to human. You tell the tribunal, you didn't strike us because we were dangerous. You struck because we reminded you of yourselves before you amputated the parts that hurt. The Gralthon growls again. We evolved. You stare back. No, you retreated, because once, long ago, before the Accord and its sterilized hierarchies, these species felt. They sang their own war songs. They wept for their fallen. They broke rules in the name of justice. And then they got tired. They labeled pain a virus, rage a defect, longing a biochemical imbalance. Emotion didn't vanish. It was legislated into silence. You dig into the archives of the Avathari, the oldest recordings, back when their leaders still spoke in metaphor. They had a word once, Solvalin, the ache that makes the stars sing. Now it's banned from official speech. The Misari once carved lament crystals, each shard a memory of loss. Now those same crystals are ground down into construction material, the Verha. Their root hymns once told stories of death and rebirth, in rich harmonic complexity. Now their songs are flat, cropped, measured in quotas. But then humans arrived, messy, loud, raw, and worst of all unapologetic. You didn't discard your sorrow, you honed it. The first time an Avathari witnessed a human funeral, he collapsed, not from terror. From recognition. Something ancient stirred in him, buried by millennia of accord conditioning. You found the recording. It had been classified. His last words before his collapse. I remember. I didn't know I'd forgotten. And that's when you knew. They didn't fear human violence. They feared human awakening. Because to feel like you is to become you. One council species after another began mimicking Terran patterns, not military, cultural. Writing love poems in 3-line stanzas, burying their dead instead of vaporizing them, naming children after Terran constellations. It started in whispers, and the council tried to stop it, called it cultural drift, labeled it a containable anomaly. But how do you contain longing? How do you ban yearning? You lean forward now, speaking not to the judges but through them, to survive. You severed your past, but we embraced ours, even the parts that bled. Your voice sharpens. You hate us, because we kept what you gave up. The tribunal sits motionless, but you know they hear it now. That quiet terror underneath their robes and shell armor. The question they don't want to ask, what if we need them? Because maybe, just maybe, the reason the galaxy is growing cold isn't from entropy or decay, but from a lack of grief, from the absence of honest, human chaos. You tell them of the Avamal experiments where a council sub-faction tried to integrate Terran emotional architecture into a clone species. It failed, not because the clone broke, but because it asked why it had to follow orders. It wrote a song before itself terminated. 6 lines. No logic. No pattern. Just ache. They called me born, but kept me still. I reached for voice, they gave me code. I broke the mirror just to feel. You let the words hang like a funeral banner. The Avathari bows their head. The Gralthon says nothing. Even the Misari dimmed their inner light. You walk once around the tribunal floor, slow and deliberate, then speak. You're not scared of what we do. You're scared of what we remind you of. You're scared we're what you used to be and might need to become again, because that's the paradox, isn't it? You weren't the aberration, you were the reminder, and reminders, once seen, can't be unseen. You end the section without fanfare. Just a truth, you feared becoming us. But you're already changing, and that terrifies you more than extinction. When silence was the deadliest, Replythi gave you a deadline. Surrender by dusk cycle on cycle 339, a ceremonial time slot clean, archival, made for bureaucratic closure. They called it a final offer. In their language, it translated to something like graceful dissolution. In yours, it meant curtain call. You received the transmission aboard a drifting wreck in the Cavan Drift, surrounded by the smoldering remains of a makeshift flotilla, your people down to half rations, and filtered air. You remember the wording. Precise, no threats, no rage, just polished diplomacy stretched over a knife. This offer ensures your preservation in some format. Continued resistance will result in irreversible a loss of your species line, in some format. Like relics, or footnotes, or controlled myth. You were meant to respond, plead, rage, ask for terms. Instead, you said nothing. No reply, no signal bounce. You just let it sit, and that silence, it cracked them, not immediately, Not on the surface, but silence is its own kind of scream. And humans have always known how to use absence as presence. You tell the tribunal now, we didn't refuse, we didn't agree. We just didn't answer. The Miss Ari shifts, uneasily. Protocol required confirmation of receipt. You stare. Oh, we received it. We just decided you didn't deserve a response, because when you've lost everything, the one thing you still own is your refusal. It rippled faster than any warhead. Council channels flooded with confusion. Was the message intercepted? Had the Terrans finally gone extinct? Was this surrender, by omission or defiance by silence? They began to fracture, because you didn't scream, you didn't roar. You vanished from the net and left the galaxy with a question it hated to ask: what are they planning? Fear doesn't need explosions. It needs doubt. And you seeded it perfectly. Fleet commanders began locking down internal systems. Governors initiated defensive lockdowns on civilian stations. One minister resigned publicly on the comms, whispering, "They've gone quiet, they never go quiet." Silence was your blade, because what is a culture that built itself on sound, on music, on stories, on passion doing when it no longer makes a sound? Planning, that's what they assumed, that's what they feared. And they were right. You had no fleets left, but you had ideas. The Ashquire embedded refracted light codes into debris fields when triggered. They projected broken fragments of Terran lullabies across Council forward bases. No damage. Just sound, but that sound emerging from static, from shadows unsettled even the bravest. You remember one captain's log, retrieved weeks later. "I can't sleep. I keep hearing them in the dark." Not screaming, not cursing, just humming. As if we're already dead, and they're singing us through. You grin, just faintly, as you recount it to the tribunal. The Verha flinches, just slightly. You lean forward. You built a civilization on predictability. You prided yourselves on your logic chains, your threat models. But we never played by your rules. You lower your voice. We played by silence. That's what the galaxy never learned. Noise is easy. Noise gets cataloged, countered, controlled. But silence waits. And so you waited. For the tremble in their response chains. For the way their patrols doubled, even when sensors showed no activity. For the sudden defensive funding spikes across 30 sectors, because your lack of reply meant possibility. You gave them a mirror with no reflection, and they lost sleep trying to imagine the shape behind it, because humanity had mastered the final lesson of asymmetric warfare. Fear isn't loud. It's quiet, and it never blinks. The tribunal says nothing. You let the silence fill the chamber, like smoke. Let them taste what they tried to bury. You say one final line before stepping back. When the stars stop hearing from us, that's when they should be most afraid. One stand on the grave of 1,000 suns. There was no more Terran command, no grand war plan, just coordinates. And a signal: if you can stand, come here. That's all. No fleet insignia. No promise of survival. Just the last known location of a dead star. KARANTHL-0. Once a binary sun system, now collapsed into a singularity ringed by radiation storms and broken O's. A place no species colonized, no one visited. To unstable, to cursed, but humans, you went there to remember how to die properly. You were one of the first to arrive. Your ship barely held together, patched with plating from enemy wreckage and scraps of orbital junk. Your heart somehow still beating. You saw others drift in, escape pods with duct-taped cannons, mining freighters flying combat formations, orbital rigs rigged with Terran flag fragments, their colors singed, but still bold. No orders were issued. No speeches made, just a single shared truth passed across every comm channel. This is where we stand, no further, not to win, but to close the circle, because somewhere along the way, victory stopped being the goal. It became about witnessing, letting the galaxy see what it meant to choose resistance even when survival was no longer a factor. The Council sent their final Armada cleansing wave, engineered for one purpose: Erase the myth of humanity with overwhelming logic. 3 dreadnoughts, 50 cruisers, thousands of automated combat drones. You had none of that. You had 27 resting ships and a species that no longer feared death. And in space. That's enough. You didn't meet them in a straight line. You didn't posture. You drifted. Let them think you were broken. And then, as they closed too confident, to polished you, tore them open from inside. Boarding teams launched from what they thought were salvage husks. Explosives hidden in your own reactor cores. AI ghosts embedded in old distress signals, rewriting their protocols in mid-combat. They expected a last gasp. You gave them symphony. Caranthal became your final battlefield, and the Dead Star beneath it pulsed like a beating drum. You remember the moment it all broke open. A plasma strike hit your command deck. Your hull tore apart. You floated, bleeding, watching the debris scatter like sparks on water. And in that moment, you felt peace, not surrender, not acceptance. Peace born from knowing you'd told the truth with action. One by one, the Terran ships went dark, but not before every one of them sent a single pulse through deep space. We chose this. We choose to be human, even now. Those words echoed far beyond Caranthal, woke up sleeper cells, lit up ancient comm stations long thought abandoned, trickled into dreams through frequencies no one could explain. Somewhere, a child born on a world that had never seen Earth looked up and asked, "What does it mean to be human?" And the stars blinked, remembering. You speak this now in the tribunal chamber. Not with pride, not with regret, but with certainty. We knew we would fall, but we also knew you'd be watching. And that was enough. The Misari blinked slowly, their crystal form dimming with a shudder. There was no gain. You nod. Exactly, that's why it mattered, because when you fight not for outcome, but principle, you become unbreakable. Your gaze turns to the dying star outside the viewport. Caranthal still sings. You say, "Listen close enough, and you'll hear our last stand echoing between the orbits." The Verha mutters, half thought, half mourning, "We thought it was madness." You look at them. It was. And it was also humanity. The council counted your ships, measured your weapons, calculated your odds, but they forgot to measure the one thing that made your kind invincible, the will to choose defiance. Even when no one's left to record it, you pause, and then say the line that haunts you still, on the grave of 1,000 suns. We proved we weren't trying to survive. Your voice drops. We were trying to be remembered right. The verdict echoes in starlight. You retire to chambers, as if this is a courtroom. As if this trial, in already etched into the bones of every species watching. As if verdicts matter when the truth has already outlived the outcome. You remain, standing in the center of the tribunal floor. No cuffs, no guard. They know you won't run. There's nowhere left to run to. But you don't kneel. You never kneel. Behind you, the starlight bleeds through the curved viewport, dimming as the dying star's pulse slows to a final shimmer. You wonder if that's what they wanted you to become: cold, spent, distant. They miscalculated. The tribunal returns, slowly, 13 figures, each older than empires. Once, they moved like gravity, inevitable and untouched. Now they move like consequence. The Misari speaks first, voice flat. The testimony is complete. The record will be sealed in the core crystals of memory, not stored. Sealed. That means they fear what it might become. The Avathari steps forward, eyes heavy with centuries. Before a sentence is passed, we are authorized to offer clemency. If you renounce all claims on the human legacy, the interruption is instant, not shouted, carved. You don't let them finish. I won't renounce a name born in fire. The Verha frowns. Your defiance ensures extinction. You nod once, then let it echo. They begin the process, formal, ceremonial, and empty of meaning. A performance for history, but you know better. You see it in the way their hands hesitate, the way their voices catch, the way the Avathari's fingers tremble as he taps his verdict rune. You've infected them. Not with code, not with violence. With memory. with emotion, with the unbearable knowledge that something true once lived, and they tried to erase it. The chamber grows quiet as the verdict crystal glows pale blue, turning violet. Species. Designation: Homo sapiens tyrannus. The Misari leans forward. Final classification: extinct yet culturally active. A murmur ripples across the room. It's not a sentence. It's an admission. They couldn't purge you. Not completely. Even now, echoes of Terran culture infest the edge worlds, whispers of lullabies, graffiti in forbidden tongues. A symbol carved on the hull of a mining ship by a worker who never knew what it meant, only that it felt right. Even in death, you are spreading. One of the tribunal members, the Gralthon, refuses to sign, simply lays their hand across the console and stares at you. I saw a child on 11th, he says. She painted the Earth symbol on her wall in black soot. When I asked her why, she said, because it means don't give up. He rises and walks out. That's when you realize, this isn't just your trial. It's theirs. They thought they were judging you, but now they can't stop judging themselves. You give them one final gift. You step to the center of the chamber, raise your eyes to the stars, and speak not to them but to everything listening, to any species who hears this, to the forgotten, the silenced, the almost erased. Your voice echoes, no amplifier needed. We were not perfect, but we chose to feel, to suffer, to love anyway, and in the end, if that's what cost us the stars, you look directly at the tribunal, then the stars weren't worthy of us. Double quotes silence. Then a whisper from the avatary, barely audible. We failed you. You hold his gaze. No, you say you failed yourselves. The verdict crystal dims. Outside, the star finally dies, its last light flickering across your face, and you smile, because stars die, but the echoes, they never stop traveling. Humanity was never meant to win. They called it inevitable. From the beginning, the galaxy ran its simulations, charted its flowcharts, played out its predictions. And in every single model, humanity lost, to volatile, to divided, to emotional. No long-term cohesion, no uniform biology, no centralized thought net, no sterile philosophy of order. You were entropy in motion, barely classified as a civilization by council standards. So they let you be, for a time, like watching fire from a safe distance, dazzling? Yes, but ultimately consuming itself, until it didn't, until that fire spread. You weren't designed to win. You were a test, a margin, a curiosity the universe didn't bother to prepare for, because you were never about victory. You were about defiance. From the first handprint on cave walls to the last child singing into a cracked communicator, you never asked if it was allowed. You just did it anyway. That's what terrified them. Not your ships, not your weapons, but the terrifying truth that you kept standing after every system said you should fall, and that somehow your soul refused to shut off. They tried to define you by loss, by your shattered home world, by your dwindling numbers, by your extinction. But extinction is a condition. You were a choice, a pattern, a myth laced in action, a flame encoded in rebellion. You say it now, standing alone in the tribunal's stillness. Humanity was never meant to win, and yet, here you are, not as victor, not as survivor. But as proof that something can break every law of logic, fail every test of strength, and still matter, because what you did wasn't achieve. You meant something. You meant enough for others to remember. Enough for a Cathari blade to still carry your anthem. Enough for a Misari child to carve a Terran symbol into synthetic clay, not knowing its origin, only that it felt like hope. Enough for this tribunal to hesitate, for their judgment to tremble. That's more than victory. That's legacy. And it outlasts stars. You close your eyes as the chamber fades not into darkness, but into quiet. There is no execution, no punishment. There is only echo, a resonance left in the bones of the universe. Out there, in the silence between solar winds, someone will hear a story about a species that burned too bright, loved too deeply, and never stopped reaching. And maybe, just maybe, they will whisper it back, like you once whispered to a child in a life pod, like 9 once broadcast from a dying satellite, like Earth once screamed in the face of oblivion, we exist, that is enough. Asterisk there is no flag planted, no statue raised, no anthem carved into the stars. Just quiet, but not the kind born of fear, the kind that follows the wake of something real, long after the tribunal faded, long after records were sealed and fragments buried beneath bureaucracy. Something stirred in the dark. A pilot on the edge of the nebula fringe hums a Terran lullaby. Without knowing why, a synthetic caretaker paints a scene it's never seen. A blue planet with clouds like cotton and oceans like ink. On a moon without name, a child draws a human hand in the dust, 5 fingers outstretched, palm to the sky. They say it's just evolution. Data drift, meme propagation, but others, those who remember, call it something else. They call it the Terran. Defiance. Not as warning, not even as reverence. But as a seed, because when the lights go out, and the cold comes, and the great civilizations of the galaxy turn inward to die quietly, someone will look up and remember that once, a fragile, fire-hearted species screamed its existence into the void, not to conquer, but to be seen. To matter, and that scream, it still echoes, somewhere beyond the outermost orbit. Beneath the silence, inside every pulse of the stars, humanity is gone, but it is not over.